Ladies and gentlemen, today we crack open our history books to page 1 to address probably the most trying aspect of me making videos about history. And that's the fact that I don't use a history book. I dare say! How dare you, sir? You're a disgrace! A disgrace!
Wait, is this Connix?
Okay, 8th graders, here we go. Early American society. Now again, it's important to make sure I make this clear. We're not talking about Americans as in America as a country. We're just talking about America as a geographical region, right? The area we call North America, more specifically, the land and people who live in the land that we now consider modern America, we're now calling the people who live here Americans, even though at the time they wouldn't have called themselves, well, much of anything, just people. These early humans that lived here, they didn't know how to read or write, and therefore they left no written records. Think about that for a minute. The only evidence we have that they even existed are in the things they left behind. Historians and archaeologists call these artifacts, and these artifacts are the way that we learn about these people. Well, because there's nothing else. Let's talk about oral history. Oral history is the primary way that people would have communicated back then. Okay, and it's how you pass on your history through the telling of stories or songs or poems, right? So after you develop a language and you're communicating, people who are older, your elders, might pass down information by telling stories. Moving on. Oh, yeah, let me do this. Pointer off. Boom. Okay, these early humans were Stone Age people. So stone was their most advanced form of technology for tools or weapons. So you need an axe. I wonder what it's going to be made of. Stone. You need a weapon. Stone. Right? I need something to cut something with. Maybe I'll use some bone. And how did I get the bone? I used stone. Hope you're getting the pattern here, right? They didn't have advanced metal working, right? What did they have? Stone. What else did they have? Bone. Occasionally they may have had pottery. But again, the stone was the primary tool they had. Pretty basic. And knowledge and culture are passed through history through storytelling, okay? And we call that, again, oral history. But think about what that means. What are the ramifications for humans if the only way you can pass information is by telling stories? Well, what if the people in your group aren't very good at telling stories, right? What if like the oldest people in your, let's say there's 50 of you, and the 5 oldest people, they all stink at telling stories. Now, is your knowledge and culture going to be really strong? Probably not. Well, what happens if the oldest people get sick and die before they tell the stories? What happens to that knowledge? It's gone. It would be pretty hard to live this way, and we can understand why humans spent such a long time in this time period, right? You guys are so used to instant information at your fingertips at all times. You've got the most advanced devices ever created in human history at your fingertips. And right now, you probably, some of you, are looking at them instead of watching me. Well, get refocused. Okay. Here's the problem with this. It's like if you were playing a video game that was really hard, but you couldn't save. And every time your character died, you had to start over and over and over. And you can see why humans that lived in the Stone Age lived for this period of time last for 15, 20,000 years without much progress. Well, because they kept having to start over because people die. Keep in mind the average age at this time period would have been about how old I am. mid-30s. Now, some people would have lived till 50 or 60, but a lot of people would have died very young, and so that brings that average age down really low into the 30s. Moving forward. Culture. This is going to be important for us to have as a vocab word. It's a set of common values, traditions, language, government, and family relationships. Everyone has culture because everyone has values. Everyone has a culture because everyone has traditions. Even if your tradition is like, I don't make my bed, that's a tradition. I do make my bed, that's a tradition. People use language, right? All types of communication require language. Now, some of our culture might be online culture, LOL, right? It might be a hand signal culture, thumbs up. Whereas some places on planet Earth, thumbs up might be an insult. Government and family relationships, all of that creates your culture. Okay. Environments. This is important because we're talking about a large area in North and South America, but specifically North America. And in North America, well, guess what? We've got a lot of different environments. If you're in the Pacific Northwest and there are giant redwood forests and it's raining all the time and it never gets too cold, that's going to be very different than being up in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, right, where you're freezing, or in the middle of the Great Plains like we are, right here on this sort of line where it's like 95 degrees and hot and humid, right? Or down in Louisiana where it's very hot, or out in the American Southwest where it's 120 degrees and dry, right? Environments and your climate and landscapes shape you, and they shape the people that live there. We're going to be talking more about that. Artifacts, stuff people left behind, right? This is an artifact because if Mr. Probst were to disappear tomorrow and all the people on planet Earth were to be gone and aliens were to come 300 years from now and they found this, they'd be like, oh, look at this interesting piece of technology that they used. That would be an artifact. 3, they depended on hunting and gathering for food. I've discussed this already, but again, what that means is find berries, find fruit, find nuts, gather them, eat them, or hunt. Take my spear, stab something that's moving, preferably not a human, and then eat it. They couldn't farm. Very important, right? Because hopefully your brain has made that connection. Well, why didn't they just farm? That would have been way easier. Well, they didn't know how to. And with oral history being the only way of transferring knowledge, we've talked about the problems with that, farming was just out of the picture. So, tools and weapons were made from stone, bone, and wood. There's some really neat examples of these. You even see right here, actually some cool ones have shells. Okay, taking bones, taking your stone and whittling out a hole in it, fitting this shell inside there, maybe wrapping it with some animal sinew. Very cool. They died young, 30s and 40s. Now remember, big part of this means that some of them may have lived to be 70 or even 80, but the vast majority would have, there's a lot they're going to die at 3 or 4 or 5, like under 5 years old, and that's going to sort of bring the average age down. We know this because we can look at the skeletons left behind, and we can look at the sort of average age of people who were buried and when they died, what they died from. Here's what they died from. Well, some of them were killed because they might have a crack in their skull. Well, we know that person died a violent death. They may have died because of bad food, right? Food poisoning. Remember, no refrigerators. Food could spoil. There could be all kinds of parasites and problems with their food source. If you're hunting all the time, it's not perfect. And they also died of disease because some of our people living in this area, they built these pretty incredible civilizations with many people, but when you add a lot of people, you add a lot of waste, sanitation issues, disease spreading, and at that time, they're not going to really know how to combat that. Okay, moving on. What did humans need to transform from nomadic hunters to settled civilization? It's a great question. Let's answer that. Over time, they had to change. And remember, we talked about in class last week the importance of time. over time. This means that your great-grandfather may have done something a little different, and then your grandfather started to do that too, and then by the time your grandfather passed that on to your father, it was kind of well known, and then your father passed it on to you and your generation may have slightly changed it a bit, right? Over time. So around 7,000 years before the Common Era, so that's 9,000 years ago, they began to farm. Pretty cool. Doesn't seem like much, but squash, beans, and corn were pretty important. And as soon as you started farming, you have civilization. If you don't have to go anywhere and you don't have to spend all of your time hunting, suddenly you've got people sitting around saying, I'm full and I'm bored. And when we're bored, we come up with cool stuff. Plus, when you've got people settled down, what happens? Population rises. Right? Incan, Mayan, Aztec, Olmec, Mississippian. Over here is very cool. Right across the Mississippi River is Cahokia. The Cahokia mounds were very impressive mound, and we had these mound builders that lived right, 30 minutes from here. Huge civilization, maybe tens of thousands of people living together in different mound cities. All pretty neat. And that's because they were farming. They had excess food. With excess food, you have extra people. Without having everyone needing to hunt all the time, those people can spend their time doing other things. And then native empires are going to spread all over North and South America until Europeans arrive. And when Europeans arrive, it's a bit of a disaster movie. Think of this as any of those movies that you may have seen out there where like civilization is crumbling and airplanes are crashing and everyone's dying and volcanoes are erupting, right? This is what it would have felt like to have been a Native American when Europeans arrived, because suddenly your society and culture that had been developing for 7,000 years, maybe, and had been sort of going one way, completely collapses. 90% of the people living in your village, town, city are gone in a very relatively short amount of time. So just imagine what it would be like if the 8th grade, let's say there are 70 of us, okay? And then suddenly, right, there's only 7 people left. And you're all looking around like, what happened to everyone else? Is the 8th grade going to be very different if there's just 7 of us as compared to 70? Yes. And then also Europeans are going to bring with them guns. Very important thing we'll spend more time talking about, but they're a game changer. If someone is fighting with a bow and arrow or something wood, maybe a little bit of metal or stone, and then someone else has a gun, there's a clear advantage to the person with the gun. Steel is also going to be very important. Being able to wear armor, sitting on the top of a horse with a saddle, with stirrups, being able to ride fast into people, shooting guns, wielding swords, versus having none of that is going to be a huge technological advantage. And then also this pursuit of gold that we see the Europeans looking for is going to push them all over North and South America. And they're going to be pretty brutal, and it's going to cause not only the death of many Native Americans, but the collapse. Now, it's not all that they went around killing individual Native Americans, but if you sneezed and that disease spread, like wildfire. Native tribes then emerge and they spread across North and South America, but much smaller, right? No more were there these huge cities of 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 people like we may have seen the Mayan and the Aztecs and the Mississippi in cultures, but instead, in order to survive this sort of post-apocalyptic native world after European disease arrive, we see the emergence of all of these smaller, very specialized Native American tribes, which are very much the Native Americans that we in American culture are familiar with. Okay, it's time for you to take your notes. I've given you these. I'll actually fill that in with some information where it says questions vocab. And just like you did before, I'd like you to run through these 2 slides and fill those out for me. This is a cool idea to sort of give you the idea of the different regions we're going to have in North America and the different Native American names that you're going to become familiar with over the next couple weeks. And just to give you a visual of the amount of different native tribes, there's tons. Go ahead and pause it here if you want to check them out. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going until we get to the end. Another good one for you to take a look at. All right, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later.